Hi, I'm Dr. Professor Goggle Bob. Like many of you, I've been enjoying playing a lot of The Legend of Zelda Breath of the Wild recently. Many people have been lauding this game as a return to The Legend of Zelda's roots. The original Legend of Zelda was all about exploring a vast, unknown countryside and scouring that expansive landscape for secrets, just like Breath of the Wild. While Legend of Zelda has lost something over the years thanks to 3 decades of memorization and 12 billion facts, many people still fondly remember that first Zelda feeling. Thus, people adore Breath of the Wild's back-to-basics approach and casually dismiss everything else that The Legend of Zelda has been over the intervening years. I cannot abide that. The Legend of Zelda Breath of the Wild is the sum of all Zeldas that came before it, and I can prove it, with spoilers for the entire franchise. So you've been warned. The Legend of Zelda is way too obvious an ancestor, so we're going to start with the adventure of Link. While many point to this adventure as the black sheep of the family, it does provide the prototype of much of what happens in Breath of the Wild. Compare the swordplay of The Legend of Zelda and the adventure of Link, and which seems better suited for Lynel destruction. And while we're at it, the adventure of Link introduced one of Breath of the Wild's greatest assets, the joy of finding a solution through movement. There are treasures or dungeons in plain sight that are impossible to reach in The Legend of Zelda, but those discoveries are tool-based. Use the raft to get to the shrine, use the ladder to get to a heart piece. The adventure of Link uses its magic as tools, but in much more fun ways. Use the jump spell to reach that high room, but also spring around like a demented flea man while you have the chance. Turn into a fairy to find the secret passage, but also feel free to buzz around like a buzzy little Link bee. Blue Candle and Red Candle are simple press B to use tool items, while the spells of the adventure of Link are how we get to drop a bomb into a giant skull and watch everyone explode. Moving on to 16-bit pastures, we've got A Link to the Past, which is very much Super The Legend of Zelda, and you'd be forgiven for assuming all of its best Breath of the Wild traits appeared back in Legend of Zelda. You'd be wrong, though, as A Link to the Past introduced maybe the most important Zelda innovation, the Dark World. Now, gentle audience, I know you're already typing up a corrective comment claiming that I've gone crazy, and while the whole multiple worlds mechanic may have worked to great effect in earlier adventures like A Link to the Past, and Ocarina of Time, and A Link Between Worlds, there is no alternate world in Breath of the Wild. What you see is what you get. There's no time traveling, Twilight Realm, or what the Ganon ever going on, so why claim it's an influence? And to that I ask you, how does the world look when you first start A Link to the Past? Simple answer, check your map. There's the world of A Link to the Past. There's Death Mountain, there's Hyrule Castle, and we've even got the Proto-Gerudo Desert in the southwest. That map is available within the first minutes of A Link to the Past. But anyone that has played the game knows that it's only half the story. There's an entire other world out there for Link to find, and it's simultaneously very similar and dramatically different. Here's the opening map for Breath of the Wild, a gigantic plateau that is Hyrule in miniature. There are ruins, fields, snowy mountains, and a smattering of monsters between here and there. There's even a guardian or two for your fleeing pleasure. Now let's look at the map after 100 more hours of playtime. Whoa, okay, there was a whole new world out there. And that world uses all the same skills as the plateau, but it's also a whole new experience. Sound familiar? It might not be a dark world, but the gradually and deliberately expanding world of Breath of the Wild traces back to the good old days of A Link to the Past more than The Legend of Zelda. The first real step toward the freedom of Breath of the Wild is Link's Awakening. From the absolute moment someone at Nintendo decided to give Link a jump button in an isometric world, Zelda was changed forever. Pegasus Boots plus Rock's Feather allows for a number of interesting maneuvers, and, while it is required for a few puzzles, it's a lot more likely to see use as a way to hurl Link over any obstacle in his path. Which, yes, I'm not just comparing this to Breath of the Wild's Link leaping over pitfalls, I'm also talking about the designers trusting the player with enough freedom to paraglide right off the tower and into the unknown, or at least the next town over. Link's Awakening allowed for a lot of item combinations that were potentially puzzle-breaking. Bomb arrows found their origins here in more ways than one, but it didn't break the game in any way. Or, to be more specific, it may have broken parts of the game, but it didn't break the fun. The Legend of Zelda Ocarina of Time introduced the concept of Link changing shoes. This is essential to Breath of the Wild. Moving on, Majora's Mask might be the first The Legend of Zelda that gave a damn about its NPCs, but more importantly, it was the first Zelda game to give roles to its NPCs. Yes, previous adventures had a tendency to see Link consulting with some wise old sage or palling around with Azora for a stage or two, but Majora's Mask was the first game to really get the ball rolling on when you need something, you go to the something guy. You could try to play the whole of Majora's Mask without ever visiting Tingle, but you know you will seek him out every time he's available because he's got your map hookups. Or when you've got some mail to deal with, you go see the postman. And, of course, when you need to feel the soul-crushing ennui of an existence that means nothing, you see the happy mask salesman. This is echoed in Breath of the Wild, where Cass the Recordian player is completely optional bird person, but you gravitate towards his happy little ditties because, damn it, it's Shrine Riddle time. Cass is not Revali. He doesn't technically have any sort of impact on the plot, but he's as welcome a sight as Majora's Coffee, the kid in the fox mask? That guy. The gigantic open world of Breath of the Wild probably most owes its existence to Wind Waker, a game that clearly taught Nintendo some lessons. Conceptually, Wind Waker employed a brilliant system for exploration. Its huge world is divided into a basic grid, and each square on that grid contains one interesting thing. Unfortunately, this is boring as hell. It's cool exploring and filling in your map, but once you've checked off a square, you're all done. Want to know why the HD re-release got the fast sale as an upgrade? Because once you've cleared out a square, you never need to visit that spot ever again, and then an interesting puzzle island becomes a boring stretch of highway. While it may drive completionists nuts, Breath of the Wild learned from this, forsook the grid system, and tossed its shrines and interesting bits across the landscape. There are 3 shrines practically on top of each other in one mountain range, and 3 shrines out in the wasteland that are figuratively miles apart. You never would have seen such randomness in Wind Waker, but you'd never have even gotten to this point without learning from that adventure. Twilight Princess is next on the hit list. TP slavishly follows the Ocarina of Time template, and complete with some of the most useless tool items in the franchise, you'd be forgiven for assuming this is one of the more regressive branches of the Legend of Zelda evolution tree. However, if you play Ocarina of Time and Twilight Princess back-to-back, perhaps in an effort to create some kind of Legend of Zelda franchise montage or some nonsense, you'll note there's a significant difference in the way Link controls. It's not just about technology. The Link of the N64 is incredibly stiff, and built for a grid that doesn't actually exist. GameCube Wii Link, meanwhile, actually controls like a human, and can waddle around much of the world available to him. Wolf mode makes this extra obvious, as the old Barker has a previously unseen level of Link agility. We're not quite at Breath of the Wild's scale everything forever levels yet, but Ocarina of Time Link can be thwarted by a guardrail that wouldn't stop your grandma, while TP Link has a much greater control of his environment. And finally, we have Skyward Sword. Skyward Sword has a lot of obvious proto-Breath of the Wild ideas, like crafting, weapon durability, and a sad truth that Link has the same sprinting ability as a 70-year-old professional gravy guzzler. But the real secret of Skyward Sword is the gimmick that everybody seems to think has gone away: motion control. While it's a fun way to make all your dueling dreams turn to ash, the swordplay of Skyward Sword was absolutely not the point of its motion controls. It's that it allowed Link to find new ways to interact with the world, and thus new puzzles and gameplay opportunities. Slashing a sword licker is what everyone remembers about Skyward Sword, but search your memory for bomb rolling, or sword eyeball circling, or whatever you want to call it. Yes, you've been able to use bombs and confuse eyeballs in other games, but now there's a whole new, intuitive way to do it. While we could claim this is the genesis of horrible apparatus shrines, this
Link can feel the world control scheme also feeds into a number of more subtle areas, like when you went to Magnesis a treasure chest right into a moblin's face.
So there you have it. Breath of the Wild is the sum of every The Legend of Zelda that came before. Okay, maybe not every Zelda. I'm deliberately ignoring some of the spin-offs and such here, mainly because I don't want to play Phantom Hourglass ever again. But even those adventures have clearly had an impact on modern Hyrule. Yes, you might get that the first Legend of Zelda feeling from the general exploration of Breath of the Wild, but every moment sightseeing in that world is informed by Link's other adventures. Breath of the Wild comes from the wisdom of previous Zeldas and courageously creates a powerful experience. See what I did there with the whole Triforce?